Hello and welcome to Section 5 of the Silviculture module. I'm Glenn Ahrens, an extension forester on the north coast of Oregon. I'm also a forest ecologist with about 25 years of experience in the Pacific Northwest. In the previous section, we learned about tree biology and about how trees grow and what makes trees work. Now we'll look at forest ecology and the factors that shape forests in a particular location. If you're interested in forestry, you should be interested in forest ecology, because the science of ecology is fundamental to the practice of silviculture. In this session, you will learn about definitions of ecology and ecosystems. I will describe some major components, processes, and characteristics of ecosystems. And I will illustrate the importance of thinking about ecosystems at different scales of space or time, depending on your situation. Ecology is a science that originated at the beginning of the 20th century. It is a study of relationships between organisms and their environment. From the perspective of the organism, ecology is about interactions with the physical environment and with other organisms. Because people sometimes associate the word ecology with a value judgment, it is important to emphasize that ecology is an objective science. When you step back and look at all of the organisms, the non-living environment, and the ecological relationships in a given area, you're looking at an ecosystem. It is important to recognize that an ecosystem includes both living and non-living components. Living components include plants, animals, insects, bacteria, fungi, etc. Non-living components include things like water and rock, or environmental components such as light, temperature, wind, etc. An ecosystem functions through specific processes. One major process involves the transfer of energy through the ecosystem and the storage of energy in components of the ecosystem. For example, energy from the sun is absorbed by leaves. Leaves may be consumed by deer or other animals, and then waste or dead tissues are broken down by decomposers. Energy is also stored in parts of plants that may last for decades or centuries, such as the wood in a tree, until the wood is finally broken down by slower decomposition. The process of energy transfer and storage is often referred to as the food web or food chain. And as you learned in Section 4 on tree biology, carbon is a key element in the process via photosynthesis and respiration. So we often refer to the carbon cycle as an important process in forest ecosystems, related to the energy cycle. Another important ecosystem process is the cycling of various nutrients in water. The elements of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur are important nutrients for plants. We call them macronutrients because they are required in relatively large amounts. Much smaller amounts of the micronutrients, such as iron, manganese, and zinc, are required by plants, though these micronutrients are also very important. Nutrients cycle through the ecosystem, from the physical environment via uptake into plants, and via recycling through a variety of pathways, through consumers, decomposers, soils, and the atmosphere. Of course, water is one of the most crucial molecules for life, and the water cycle is a major process in ecosystems. Here in Oregon, water in the atmosphere often comes ashore off the Pacific Ocean, as shown in this satellite image of water vapor over the western United States. Water vapor in the clouds forms precipitation, falling as rain or snow into the forest. After the precipitation reaches the forest, trees and other plants have a big influence on what happens next. Some of the precipitation may go right back into the atmosphere from evaporation or transpiration off the forest canopy. Much of the water from precipitation will filter through the forest canopy to reach the forest floor and soak into the soil. The functioning of plants, especially trees, has a big influence on the water cycle. Trees can take up large amounts of the water absorbed by the soil, returning the water through the leaves to the atmosphere via transpiration. Water that is not intercepted by the forest canopy or taken up by the trees from the soil can move as groundwater to the stream. and from the stream to the river, and to the ocean, where the water may evaporate and cycle back all over again. The water cycle is an important process sustaining the forest ecosystem, and the forest in turn has a major influence on the water and on all the organisms using the water. Understanding the water cycle and other ecosystem processes is very important to understanding an ecosystem. To help us describe and understand ecosystems, we look at important characteristics such as structure. For example, an important structural feature of forests is the vertical canopy structure, the canopy layers. Another structural feature is the horizontal structure, such as patchiness or uniformity of the forest across an area of land. The predominance of different plant life forms, grassland, shrubland, or forest, is another basic structural characteristic of an ecosystem. In terms of vertical structure, we look at canopy layers from the top down. Are there many different layers of foliage, from the tallest tree down through the smaller trees to the understory trees and shrubs? Or is the forest characterized by a single canopy layer? In terms of horizontal structure, is the forest uniform across a large area? Or does forest structure change significantly across a small area, such as here, where this relatively simple spruce hemlock canopy changes to this mixed conifer hardwood shrub canopy only 100 feet away? Complexity and diversity are also important characteristics of an ecosystem. A single-layered crop of one tree species with uniform size and spacing is a relatively simple ecosystem in comparison to a multi-species, multi-layered forest. Maintaining a diversity of species and structures also maintains a diversity of ecological interactions. There is a tremendous number of organisms in the forest, many of which we can't see and don't understand. Some ecosystems support many organisms, and others just a few. Another characteristic is the tendency for ecosystems to change. Forests change as trees grow and compete for resources. Accumulation of organic matter and development of soils changes ecosystem processes and productivity. Changes in climate and geology work to change ecosystems over the long term. The process of an ecosystem changing over time is referred to as succession. Succession can begin after new substrates are created by floods, glaciers, volcanoes, etc. This is referred to as primary succession. Succession also begins after major disturbances such as fire or windstorms. This is called secondary succession. Since disturbance is so often the major driver of succession, we often refer to the disturbance regime as another characteristic of an ecosystem. Fire is the most common disturbance in the Pacific Northwest, but there are many different types of fire regimes, from frequent fires with low severity to infrequent fires with high severity. Other common disturbance drivers are wind, snow and ice breakage, and epidemics of pests or pathogens, such as mountain pine beetle in lodgepole pine. The interdependence of components, the interrelationships, are another important characteristic of ecosystems. The relationship between climate and vegetation type is a good example. Grasslands and open woodlands are characteristic vegetation in warm, dry climates, such as that found in the oak woodlands of southern Oregon. And dense forests are characteristic of cool, moist climates, such as the Oregon Coast Range. But frequent fires or other disturbance can maintain open vegetation, even where climate would allow denser forest conditions. In the absence of fire, forests characteristic of cooler and moister conditions can develop. Thus, many historic grasslands and open woodlands in Oregon and Washington are changing to forests dominated by Douglas fir, as in this example from the South Puget Sound area of Washington state. At a larger scale of interrelationships, changes in vegetation can change the climate. For instance, a process of desertification can occur in the absence of the forest's influence on the water cycle. This has happened in areas where large-scale deforestation and intensive livestock grazing cause loss of soil and changes in local climate. Our understanding of how an ecosystem works depends on knowing the basic characteristics of that ecosystem in terms of structure, complexity, diversity, change, and interrelationships. In order to think about and discuss the ecosystem, you must define the scale or size that you are talking about. Since ecosystems change in space and in time, you must be aware of both. Forest management is generally a long-term endeavor, and we are often thinking in terms of outcomes for our children or grandchildren. What is your time frame? Looking at the landscape of Oregon, we often think of forests at a grand scale, but an ecosystem can be very small. What scale matters to you? Forest management practices are based on a foundation of ecological knowledge, but it is important to recognize that ecosystems are very complex and that we do not fully understand all the impacts we may have when interacting with them. As we continue to manage forests and practice silviculture, we also strive to advance the science of ecology and improve our understanding of ecosystems. For more information on forest ecology and ecosystems, refer to the Woodland Ecology chapter in our Backyard Woodlands notebook, available in the online reference section of this module. Also, refer to the publication on ecosystem management opportunities and implications for woodland owners, also available online. And for Eastside woodland owners, the Ecology and Management of Eastern Oregon Forests provides a comprehensive reference book. How can you apply ecological principles in the management of your forest? That is the subject of the next two sections of this silviculture module. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this session on forest ecology and ecosystems.